The bell above the coffee shop door chimed softly as Sarah Hale stepped inside, tugging her coat tighter around her shoulders. Outside, New York City buzzed, indifferent to her exhaustion. After a turbulent flight and hours navigating traffic, her patience was hanging by a thread. All she wanted was a hot cup of coffee and a moment of peace. The line at the counter crawled forward as Sarah tapped her fingers impatiently against her phone. Of course, she muttered under her breath, rush hour coffee chaos. Behind her, someone laughed. Not just a polite chuckle, but a low, amused sound that caught her attention. Turning sharply, Sarah found herself face to face with a man she had never seen before. He was tall, scruffy in an effortlessly charming way, with bright blue eyes that seemed to hold a permanent twinkle. Problem? Sarah asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Nope, the man replied, holding his hands up in surrender. Just, you look like someone planning the downfall of civilization. Sarah narrowed her eyes, though the corners of her mouth twitched. Only if I don't get my coffee soon. Noted. Let's keep the peace then. He paused, glancing up at the chalkboard menu. Though for the record, I hear the vanilla latte has strong mood-restoring properties. Vanilla lattes are for tourists, Sarah shot back, instantly regretting her snappy tone. The man grinned. Good thing I'm just passing through then. The line finally moved, and Sarah stepped forward to order. As she turned to leave with her coffee, she noticed the man watching her. Before she could roll her eyes, he spoke again. This might sound ridiculous, but... He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. If this were a commercial, I'd say we were two strangers destined to meet over overpriced coffee. Sarah stared at him, unsure if she should be annoyed or intrigued. That is, without a doubt, the cheesiest thing I've ever heard. Is it working? No. You're still here, though. Sarah opened her mouth to retort, but couldn't find the words. Instead, she huffed out a reluctant laugh. Fine. That was slightly clever. Who are you anyway? Peter Collins, he said, extending his hand. Occasionally charming, usually ridiculous. You? She hesitated, then shook his hand. Sarah Hale, annoyed and coffee-deprived. Peter laughed again. Well, Sarah Hale, annoyed and coffee-deprived. Do you have a moment? I swear I'm not a lunatic. Just someone who believes in seizing the moment. Sarah glanced at her watch. You get 5 minutes. They found a small table by the window, where the afternoon light filtered in through the foggy glass. The coffee shop hummed with quiet chatter and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. So, do you make a habit of talking to strangers in coffee shops? Sarah asked, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Only when they look like they might be plotting world domination, Peter shot back. But really, I was just passing through. Something about you caught my attention. Couldn't shake it. She arched an eyebrow. Careful, you're bordering on creepy again. I'll risk it, he said, smiling easily. What about you? What brings you here? Sarah sighed. Work. Life. You know, the usual cliche of running away to New York for a fresh start. Ah, the great escape. Does it feel like you found what you were looking for? Not even close. Her honesty surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise Peter. He didn't pry or push, though. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. Maybe you're not looking in the right places. Sarah tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. And what would you know about it? I'm a professional drifter, Peter replied, tapping his coffee cup. I've learned that sometimes the best things happen when you stop looking altogether. That's just something people say when they don't have answers. Maybe, he admitted with a shrug. Or maybe it's the truth. Sarah watched him for a moment, torn between skepticism and intrigue. There was something undeniably refreshing about Peter, something she hadn't felt in a long time. All right, philosopher, she said finally. What's next in your big plan? Next? Peter grinned. I'm going to convince you to see me again. Sarah laughed outright. You've got some nerve. I'll take that as a maybe. Don't get your hopes up, Collins. Peter's smile didn't waver as he leaned forward. Too late, Hale. As they sat there, the world outside the coffee shop seemed to blur into insignificance. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something shift within her, a tiny crack in the walls she had built around herself. She wasn't ready to admit it yet, but the stranger with the easy smile and terrible pickup lines had managed to intrigue her in a way she couldn't explain. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't mind. The first few weeks after their meeting felt like a dream Sarah didn't dare wake up from. Peter was relentless in his charm, texting her clever lines that made her laugh out loud and sending photos of places he visited, quiet diners, forgotten bookshops, and small-town cafes. It felt easy, like they had known each other far longer than just a few weeks. One evening, Sarah sat curled up on her sofa, her phone buzzing in her hand. Found the worst pie in Vermont. No idea how they messed up apples. Are you sure I can't just come back to NYC and save myself from food poisoning? Sarah smirked and typed back. You'd never survive NYC's no seat, no table coffee shops. Then I guess you'll have to give me survival lessons. Over coffee. Again. She paused, her fingers hovering above the screen. That was Peter, always lighthearted, as if the growing distance didn't matter. The next day, as she sat at work designing ad concepts, her phone rang. Seeing Peter's name lit up her screen, she picked up instantly. Shouldn't you be finding more bad pies? She teased. I need to hear your voice. It's therapeutic after today. Peter's tone was softer than usual, a hint of something unspoken lurking underneath. What happened? Got into an argument with my editor. She doesn't think my current book is focused enough. Maybe she's right. Ouch. Peter let out a dramatic groan. Note to self, never call Sarah Hale for comfort. She laughed. I'm saying it because you're brilliant when you're focused. You get distracted too easily. That's rich coming from you, Miss Avoid Your Own Life. Sarah stiffened. Excuse me? You heard me. Peter's voice held a smile, but there was an edge to it. You moved to New York for a fresh start, but you keep hiding. Work, coffee shops, and Netflix marathons don't count as living, Sarah. You don't get to judge me, Peter. You're the one who can't sit still in one place for more than a week. Because I'm searching for something, he shot back. And at least I'm not pretending to be content. Silence crackled between them. Sarah's heart pounded. Why are we even having this conversation? She muttered. Because, Peter sighed, his voice dropping softer. You matter to me. I want you to let the world see the person I see. She didn't respond. How could she? His words hit too close to truths she didn't want to face. The tension lingered in the days that followed. Messages became shorter, less playful. Late one night, as rain drummed against her window, her phone buzzed. Can we talk? Sarah hesitated, but answered. Hey, I'm sorry. Peter's voice was quiet. For pushing you. I miss you, Sarah. The admission startled her. You don't even really know me, Peter. Don't I? There was a pause. I know how you stir your coffee counterclockwise when you're annoyed. I know your laugh gets louder when you're nervous. I know you're afraid to let people in because you think they'll leave. And I know I don't want to be just another stranger you forget about. Sarah swallowed hard, staring out the window. I'm scared, Peter. So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than keep drifting alone. The line went quiet, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. For once, Sarah didn't argue. Come back, she whispered, and for the first time in years, she let herself hope. It was a crisp morning when Peter returned to New York. The air felt charged with the weight of unspoken words as he stood outside Sarah's apartment building, shifting his duffel bag on his shoulder. When she finally appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable, he let out a slow breath. You came back, she said softly, as if testing to see if he was real. Wasn't much of a choice, Peter replied, his grin flickering. You asked. Only took you long enough. I'm a man of dramatic timing. Right. Sarah rolled her eyes but stepped back to let him in. And the traveling philosopher returns. The apartment felt smaller with him inside. He wandered the living room, inspecting her shelves, her half-empty coffee cup, the faintly crumpled throw blanket on the sofa. It struck him how lived in her space felt, like she'd carved out a small, fragile corner of the world just for herself. So this is where you hide, Peter said, brushing a hand over a row of books. Sarah sat down, curling her legs under herself. I don't hide. I prefer peace. Peace or avoidance? Sarah's eyes narrowed. Are you here to lecture me again? Or do you want coffee? Coffee sounds good. 15 minutes later, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, mugs steaming between them. Peter looked far too comfortable, like he belonged there, and that irritated Sarah more than it should have. You're staring, she said finally. I'm thinking. Dangerous. Why do you do that? Peter's voice was calm, but something about it made Sarah tense. Do what? Keep everyone at arm's length, even me. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her fingers tightening around the coffee mug. Maybe because the last time I let someone close, they walked away. Peter's jaw tensed. I'm not them. How do I know that? You've been gone for months, Peter. I can't. She stopped herself, her voice catching. I can't go through that again. His expression softened. Sarah, I didn't disappear because I wanted to. I disappeared because I didn't know how to stay. That's not an answer. You're right, it's not, Peter admitted. The truth? I've been running from myself for years. Every place I go, I think maybe I'll find the answer. Find something that feels like home. And then I met you, and suddenly I realized that maybe I don't need to keep searching. Sarah blinked, caught off guard. That's a lot to put on me. It's not about you fixing me, Peter said quickly. It's about me wanting to stay. I chose to come back because you're the one person who makes me feel like stopping isn't giving up. Silence fell between them, heavy and fragile. Sarah stared into her coffee, her thoughts tangled. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. You scare me, Peter. I know. What if this doesn't work? What if it does? She looked up at him then, searching his face for cracks in his resolve. But Peter held her gaze steadily, his blue eyes clear and unwavering. I'm not asking you to trust me overnight, he said. But let me try. Let us try. For the first time, Sarah didn't have a ready argument. She just sat there, listening to the hum of the city beyond her window, feeling the pull of something she wasn't sure she could resist anymore. Later that day, they walked through Central Park, the autumn leaves drifting down like pieces of gold and rust. Peter bought 2 hot chocolates from a vendor, and they sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Did you really find the worst pie in Vermont? Sarah asked, finally breaking the silence. Absolutely. It was criminal. Sarah smiled faintly, stirring her drink. I still don't know why you came up to me that day in the coffee shop. Peter tilted his head, studying her with that maddeningly calm expression. Because you looked like someone worth knowing. She shook her head, half laughing. You're impossible. And yet, you keep me around. Jury's still out on that. They sat in easy silence for a while after that, the air cold but comfortable. Sarah glanced at him, watching the way his eyes lingered on the water, as if he were trying to capture every detail. Peter, she said quietly, I don't know if I'm ready. He turned to her, a small smile tugging at his lips. That's okay, I'll wait. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to run anymore. The cold wind howled against the windows as Sarah stared blankly at the blinking cursor on her screen. Deadlines were piling up, but her mind refused to cooperate. She glanced at her phone on the table, its silence unnerving. Peter had been distant for the last few days. Messages brief, calls missed. Her gut told her something was wrong. When her phone finally rang late that evening, she grabbed it instantly. Peter? Hey, his voice was off, quieter than usual, with a forced lightness that didn't fool her. You've been gone. Again. I know, Peter exhaled heavily. I'm sorry, Sarah. Where are you? She pressed. Just out of town. Needed to clear my head. Out of town? Her voice rose slightly, frustration spilling through. You didn't think maybe I'd want to know? Or did you think disappearing again would solve whatever's going on? There was a pause. I didn't want you to worry. That's not your call to make, she snapped. You keep pushing me to open up, to trust you, but you can't even tell me what's going on. What's the point of this, Peter? Sarah, it's not. Not what? Serious? Her voice cracked, the vulnerability she'd been holding back breaking through. I thought you said you were done running. I thought you were staying. Peter was silent for a long moment. I didn't want you to see me like this. Like what? Broken, he admitted finally, his voice rough. The truth is, I don't know if I can be enough for you. I came back because I wanted to try, but I'm still figuring myself out, and sometimes I'm scared I'll just drag you down. Sarah sank onto the sofa, her anger dissolving into confusion and hurt. Why didn't you just tell me? Because you've already spent enough time picking up pieces of other people, haven't you? His words hit her like a punch. How did he know? How did he always see through her, past the walls she'd so carefully built? I'm not asking you to be perfect, Peter, she said softly, her voice trembling. I just want you to let me in. I don't know how. Then let's figure it out together. Peter didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, fragile and uncertain, until he finally whispered, I don't deserve you, Sarah. You don't get to decide that. The next morning, Sarah found herself on a train. It was an impulse. something she never did, but her frustration and worry refused to let her sit still. Peter had told her once about a small town upstate he liked to visit when life became too much, the place he'd go when he needed clarity. By the time she arrived, the snow had begun to fall, dusting the streets in a layer of white. She found Peter in a tiny diner, sitting alone in a corner booth with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. He didn't notice her until she slid into the seat across from him. "You're hard to find," she said flatly. Peter blinked, startled, before his shoulders slumped. "Sarah?" "Don't Sarah me," she cut him off. "If you're going to keep shutting me out every time things get hard, then tell me now. I won't keep doing this." He looked at her, something broken flickering in his eyes. "Why are you here?" "Because I care about you, you idiot," she shot back. "And because when I told you I'd try, I meant it. But you're making this impossible. You shouldn't have to chase me down like this." "Maybe not," she agreed. "But I'm here anyway. So now you have two options. Sit there and wallow, or talk to me like you actually give a damn about what we're building here." Peter let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "I'm terrified, Sarah. Every time I get close to someone, I mess it up. I don't know how to stay, and I don't know how to let someone stay either." "Then you fight for it," Sarah replied firmly. "You don't just walk away when it gets messy. You show up. And what if I fail?" "Then you fail," she said, her voice softening. "And I'll still be here, because that's what people do when they care. You don't have to be perfect, Peter. You just have to try." He stared at her, the fight in his expression slowly giving way to something vulnerable, something real. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," Sarah admitted, "but I think you're worth it." The diner fell silent around them, the snow outside thickening, muffling the world. Peter's shoulders relaxed as he let out a long breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he said finally. Sarah smiled faintly. "You showed up in a coffee shop with a terrible line. Let's start there." Peter laughed softly, a sound that felt like warmth breaking through the cold. "I don't deserve you, but I'll keep trying anyway." "Good," Sarah replied, reaching for his hand across the table. "That's all I'm asking." And as they sat there, with snow swirling just beyond the window, it felt like the first quiet step towards something neither of them could name. Messy, imperfect, but theirs.